Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look, of course, at what is on the front pages. Time to see what is making the headlines with Pippa Crerar, the political editor of the Daily Mirror, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Both of us with us from now until just before midnight, and welcome to both of you. So to the front pages then, let us start with the Eye, which leads with the letter from bishops condemning tomorrow's flight to Rwanda, carrying channel migrants and saying it shames the UK. The Metro leading with that story too, and the court rejection of an injunction to stop the flight with the headline clear for takeoff. Threats from the EU to take legal action over the government's plans to rewrite parts of the Northern Ireland post-Brexit trade protocol make the front page of the Financial Times. That story also the lead for The Guardian, EU to fight the UK in court, it says there. The Times also making it the front page, EU pledges legal action over Brexit violation. Well, despite the cost of living crisis, the Telegraph reports that Boris Johnson is ruling out tax cuts until the rate of inflation has eased. Pippa's paper, The Mirror, says Prince William threatened to pull out of a royal engagement today if Prince Andrew was allowed to take part. And always up for a weather story, The Star goes with the looming heatwave and the headline, Hell's Bells. It's not going to be that hot for very long, is it? Anyway, a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch the programme. So let's go to Pippa Crerar, political editor of the Daily Mirror then, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Lovely to see both of you. So, Harry, let's start with the FT. Goodness me, here we go again, talking about Northern Ireland and its protocol.
Yeah, we've sort of been talking about this bill coming for so long that now it's landed, actually. It's a bit of a damp squib, I'm going to say. Actually, I was expecting this to land with a bit more of a thud, both here, both in Brussels, both in Dublin. There have been sort of dire sort of warnings for months on end, actually, that this will trigger an all-out trade war. It will plunge relations with Brussels into the deep freeze, and all sorts of retaliation would be coming. Now, actually, Brussels' response tonight seems to be, well, we'll probably consider maybe de-icing some of the legal action we were perhaps considering taking. But actually, all those sort of very bellicose threats of cutting off Brexit Britain and slapping tariffs on trade have actually been quite muted. And I think the situation in Ukraine certainly has had an effect on the fact that Brexit just isn't in the top of anyone's in tray right now. It's not at the top of anyone's agenda. And actually, the cost of living crisis as well. Britain has said, look, we're going to do this because we don't think the protocol is working for us, but we're not going to put any tariffs. If you slap tariffs on us, we're not going to slap any tariffs on you. So goods coming to the UK would actually be the same price for UK consumers. Whereas if Brussels threw up the trade barriers, actually goods that go from England and Scotland and Wales and the United Kingdom, into the European Union would be hit by higher prices. So actually, it does feel if there's ever time to have this row, now might just be it.
Well, you say that, but Ireland's Simon Coveney, for example, one of those highly critical, suggesting it was a new low, saying publishing legislation that would breach the UK's commitment under international law, the Brexit withdrawal agreement, the Northern Ireland Protocol.
But he always says that.
Is deeply damaging. But it doesn't mean it doesn't mean it, though. 2 years.
He's been saying that for 2 years. It was not exactly. I'd say if it was a bit more than Simon Coveney saying it, I think it would be a dramatic moment. But Simon Coveney's been whining for 3 years.
Well, Maroš Šefčovič also said it, and Anthony Blinken, yet another person that Liz Truss spoke to, suggested they really need to go back to the drawing board and talk to the European Union about this. You know, who is being inflexible here? Certainly the accusation from the UK government is that the European Union is being inflexible, but the EU suggesting that Liz Truss hasn't properly engaged since February. So, you know, how much of this is politics? How much is reality that this is simply not working for Northern Ireland, this protocol, Pippa?
I think there's a lot of politics in here, clearly. And I think Harry's right in saying that Brexit isn't the top of anyone's in tray when there's so much else going on. But I don't think anybody was seriously expecting the day that this legislation was published for the European Union to turn around and slap tariffs on goods. The prospect of a trade war was some way down the line. Let's not forget that this has to make its way through Parliament first. And while I think, despite a few sort of upset Tories, that everyone expects it to make it through the House of Commons, it's likely to run into some trouble in the House of Lords, however. There'll be questions about why the government views that they've used this principle of the doctrine of necessity, saying the protocol's causing peril to society and politics in Northern Ireland because of the threat to Good Friday Agreement. I expect that will be challenged quite robustly in the House of Lords, to be asking why don't they use the Article 16, which is called a lesser threshold. So I don't think anybody expects this to make it through Parliament anytime soon. In fact, it could take many, many months or even up to a year. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Brussels is holding fire on its plans. Šefčovič made quite clear today that he doesn't intend to renegotiate the protocol, despite the sort of the suggestions that be flexible in some areas of goods, the goods channels. I think there's room for some movement there. But as ever with this, the biggest block to it is not what's actually happening in Northern Ireland, but it's the message that Brussels is worried that it would send out if they did agree to rip up parts of the Brexit deal to other countries, which might be eyeing very closely what was happened with Britain and Brexit, and potentially, looking at some of the Eastern European countries, notably Hungary, where there is sort of a groundswell of opinion against the EU, and clearly Brussels doesn't want any other countries to leave the bloc. So it's not just about the politics on the ground; it's also the bigger picture as well. More on that, or shall I move on to Rwanda, Harry? What do you reckon?
Let's do this for a little bit longer.
Okay, go on then, shoot.
The irony is, though, that everybody says that there are problems with the protocol, be that the Republicans, be that the DUP, be that the Tories, even Labour accept that there are issues with protocol and how the protocol has been implemented. The EU have taken a very sort of very, very, very strict approach, almost ridiculously strict approach to implementing the protocol. And there is a slight argument, though, that they've slightly overplayed their hand in the fact that sort of almost all of sort of a vast majority of all checks coming into the single market is done in Northern Ireland, despite it being a tiny fraction of goods coming into it. So I do think there is an element of inflexibility on the EU's part. Šefčovič can say we're not negotiating. That's not because he doesn't want to. It's because he hasn't got his mandate. We talk about the fact the EU is a sacred rules-based order, and they have to sort of keep their rules all the time in order to set an example to other states, as Pippa said there. But actually, they do fold all the time. They do move. They suddenly, it's a rules-based order until they bend the rules. So I do think that actually it will take a little while to get this through Parliament, but it is clearly a negotiation tactic. These talks have been going on for 18 months with no sign of breaking. Everyone's saying, "Oh, get back around the table." There's no point in getting back around the table if there's no movement. This is clearly a negotiating tactic to show that we're willing to use a big stick, and hopefully that big stick can loosen up what is already a stalemate.
Pippa was actually nodding in agreement with you there, so that might be an indicator that I can now move on. I don't know. Because many of the newspapers...
Maybe on a negotiating tactic.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm giving you far too much control, I think, tonight, but there we are. So let's move on, because many of the newspapers are leading on Rwanda. This first flight due to set off on Tuesday. Certainly one of the charities, Care for Calais, said the numbers have been diminishing who were due on that plane because of individual legal challenges, suggesting it was now 7 who were due to take that place. We'll see what happens overnight and first thing tomorrow morning on that one. But certainly the blanket applications to both the High Court and the Appeal Court have failed, though, Pippa.
Yes. Now, this doesn't mean that the overall policy is lawful. That was going to be tested in a more substantial case later this month, I think it is. But it does mean that the Appeal Court held up the ruling on Friday, which is that the flight can take off. The farce of all of this, though, is that the flight may well end up taking off empty. Harry, as I'm sure, been talking to Home Office sources today, as I have, who's suggesting that I think the number is down to about 11 now, or certainly was a couple of hours ago. And we could, as you rightly say, down to 10 now. Okay,
seven. I think it's 7.
7, right? Yeah. Okay, so presumably by about 3 a.m, they'll be down to 0. Once again, there's the sort of the reality of what's happening on the ground, and there's sort of the backdrop of the politics of it. And the reality is that the government wants to do several things. It wants to prevent illegal immigrants from settling in the UK. It wants to deter people from making those really dangerous crossings across the channel in those small boats, and it wants to tackle those criminal gangs who run human trafficking operations. I don't think that there's anybody that thinks that it's right to try and preserve life. Indeed, the opposite. People do. The vast majority of people, everybody wants to make sure that those small boats don't end up resulting in these crossings, don't end up people putting their lives in peril. But the questions remain over whether this is the right way to do it. This is an expensive policy. This is one which we're not sure is actually going to work. The government has said that it's going to do a big advertising blitz to sort of warn all those people in the camps in Calais that if they come over, they're likely to be shipped out to Rwanda. But if the first flight is anything to go by, will they believe it? There's also the case that the vast majority of people that arrive here on these shores, either in their initial application or their first appeal, end up being granted asylum status. So is this problem actually as big as we think it is, or is it about the political messaging it sends out about protecting borders and looking tough on immigration that this particular government is very keen to promote, because it chimes well with its core vote, particularly some of those that voted for the first time in 2019. Now, it's hard not to escape the feeling that it's a little bit more about politics sometimes with this than it is about the actual reality on the ground. There are other ways that you could prevent crossings, not least setting up safe routes from some of those countries that I think it's Syria, Iraq and Iran, with the names, the countries of the individuals who were on that first flight, were due to be on that first flight, I should say. Why not have safe routes directly from those countries? We don't currently have any at the moment. Or why not have processing centres in France? Why not have a better relationship, work hard at having a better relationship with the French, which frankly is at a real low point, so that they agree to patrol the beaches more, to prevent more people coming.
We're paying them to patrol the beaches. We're already paying the French to patrol the beaches, and they're not doing anything else.
Obviously not well enough.
Well, so you think just keep throwing money at the French until they say, yeah, all right, we'll stop it?
No, I don't. I think have a good relationship, a better relationship with the French, which frankly at the moment is pretty dire, and trust is on both sides is very, very low, and try and come up with a solution, whether it's processing centres in France. I appreciate that there are concerns about them being sort of a magnet for more people coming, but there are ways
Okay, Pippa, let Harry have a word on this, because the great complaint about this, and we see the eye picking up on this letter written by bishops in the Times. We've got the letter from the Times as well, which is calling this Rwanda policy immoral, and it shames the UK. That's the eye's coverage of that letter in the Times on Tuesday. But the idea that there is no safe passage for people from those countries that Pippa listed has been the complaint about this, Harry. Why not have some route that people can get here properly then?
Firstly, there are lots of safe routes to come to this country, and people that are taking the smugglers' route are skipping those queues.
Well,
let's we go through the 300,000 people we've invited from Hong Kong who've agreed to come to this country, the 125,000 people from Ukraine
but they've not
settled in the last 6 weeks. There are ways to apply for asylum in this country without going into the hands of the people smugglers. That is a simple fact. The other problem is with your safe and legal routes, which is not something I disagree with per se, other than to say that if you do create those safe and legal routes, you have to put a cap on that. Unless you're saying safe and legal routes for anyone that wants to come to this country, you have to put a cap on that. And the problem is, if you put a cap on it, you're still going to have people who don't qualify or want to skip that queue who will continue to come without a deterrent effect. This is where I have some sympathy for the Home Office. And the fact is, in order to create a deterrent, you've got to be prepared to use some slightly eccentric ways of doing this, whether or not it works or not, and whether or not it's particularly comfortable with people or not. For want of a better idea, we're all ears. Let's hear them. The public are crying out for this problem to be fixed.
Harry,
but I'm only hearing one solution so far.
We've got independence referendums and tax cuts to pack in still, so do stay tuned. Lots more coming up, including that story in the Telegraph, no tax cuts before inflation cools off. The latest on that, just back in a moment. Well, Well, welcome back. You're watching the press preview. We are joined once again by Pippa Crerar, the political editor of the Daily Mirror, and the political editor of The Sun, Harry Cole. Pippa, let's head to the Daily Telegraph, shall we? The idea of tax cuts to come. There's certainly been that mood music from many Conservatives that they want to see a return to them being described as a tax-cutting party, but it looks like it won't happen imminently.
Yeah, and actually this is, I mean, it's a bit of an odd front page, really, because this is something that the Prime Minister and the Treasury and Number 10 have been saying for a couple of weeks now, that there's absolutely no plans, and Downing Street as well, there's no plans to cut taxes for households until inflation is under control. The plans for business taxes later this year being cut, but all the suggestions over the last couple of weeks have been, push back at those calls from Tory MPs and others who've asked for tax cuts sooner as a way, in their view, of addressing the cost of living crisis. We're told that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are both as one on this. I suppose the one sort of development is that the Prime Minister was asked about this on the radio this morning, and said that he of course understands the need to bear down on taxation, and certainly will, but we've got an inflationary spike that we've got to get through right now, looking after people as we go through that, and that's what we're going to do. So concentrating on getting through the initial cost of living crisis. Obviously the concern in the Treasury is that cutting taxes would help push up inflation further, despite suggestions from the OECD and others last week that wasn't the case.
Okay.
But they've obviously taken the decision.
OK, and Harry, very quickly on that, because I've suddenly realised the next story is on Scottish independence, which would make sense if Pippa talked about it, really, wouldn't it? Whether well. So just very quickly on the idea of tax cuts, just very quickly.
Yeah, look, I think there's definitely going to be business tax cuts and tax cuts for people who want to invest, companies to invest in the autumn. I do wonder whether the sort of inevitability of tax cuts coming mean that they're slightly playing it down now, so it can be a big surprise, a big political win when they do come, rather than just being seen as an inevitability.
Yeah, that would make sense. And quick 30 seconds on the prospect of Scottish independence, a fresh campaign being launched by Nicola Sturgeon, Pippa.
Nicola Sturgeon's slightly running her out of road on this. She has to keep throwing red meat at her party and sort of the pro-independence movement that are pushing for another independence referendum. But at the same time, she's a cautious person and won't want to do it until she knows she can win. So the latest step down the road is a whole series of papers tomorrow on how Scotland can be wealthier, happier, and fairer. Further down the line on things like currency and tax and spend, which I guess she's hoping will convince more people that she is at least thinking about a vote. She said that there'll be another vote before the end of next year. Of course, there's absolutely no sign of the British government giving her their blessing, their consent for that, which means it would have to be an illegal one, a wildcat one rather, which she said she doesn't want to do. It's just about down the line.
Sorry to interrupt you. Pippa Crerar, Harry Cole, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.